The sky over the once bustling town of Stillwater was a pale gray, the sun hidden behind thick, swirling clouds. Once a proud symbol of American progress, the town had fallen silent. Roads were littered with abandoned cars, shops stood with shattered windows, and homes sat dark and cold, their owners long gone or worse, turned. In the middle of this eerie silence, a small group of survivors moved carefully down Main Street. Their leader, a former firefighter named Mason Carter, held up his hand, signaling the group to stop. His sharp eyes scanned the street ahead, his body tense and ready. Mason was in his mid-30s, tall and broad-shouldered, with short brown hair streaked with dirt. His once clean uniform was now a patchwork of repairs, showing just how long he had been fighting to stay alive. Beside Mason stood Ava, a resourceful young woman in her 20s. Her dark hair was tied back in a messy braid, and her backpack clinked softly with every step, filled with scavenged supplies, tools, and homemade weapons. Ava had a sharp mind and was quick on her feet, always watching for danger from the shadows. Behind them, the rest of their group followed: Tom, a former schoolteacher, Sarah, a nurse who had seen far too much loss, and Jacob, a teenager who had learned to survive far too young. Together, they formed a fragile family, bound not by blood but by the shared determination to survive in a world that had crumbled around them. The group moved cautiously past a row of overturned cars, their weapons ready. Mason carried a sturdy metal pipe, Ava gripped a homemade spear, and the others clutched whatever they could use: bats, crowbars, even sharpened sticks. Guns were rare and precious, and they saved their few bullets for only the most desperate situations. Suddenly, a low groan echoed through the street, freezing everyone in place. Mason raised his hand again, silently mouthing, "Quiet." The groan came again, closer this time, and soon they saw it, a lone figure shuffling from behind a broken-down truck. It was one of them, a turned human, its eyes clouded, its skin pale and marked by decay. The creature's movements were slow but relentless, its jaws opening and closing as it reached out with twisted fingers. Mason gritted his teeth. One walker was manageable, but where there was one, there were often more. He glanced back at Ava, who gave a small nod. Without a word, she slipped to the side, circling behind the creature as Mason moved forward. The moment the walker noticed Mason, it let out a wet, gurgling hiss and lunged. Mason braced himself, swinging his metal pipe with practiced force. The blow landed with a sickening crack, dropping the creature to the ground. Before it could rise again, Ava darted in and drove her spear through its skull, ending the threat. The street fell silent once more, save for the heavy breaths of the group. Mason motioned them forward again. "Let's keep moving. We need supplies." They approached the remains of a grocery store, its front windows smashed, the inside dark and looted. Mason carefully pushed open the door, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. Shelves were overturned, food long gone, but sometimes, just sometimes, they found something useful. Inside, Ava moved quickly, searching through scattered boxes. Sarah checked the pharmacy aisle, hoping for medicine, while Tom and Jacob watched the entrance, keeping an eye out for danger. Suddenly, Ava's voice rang out in a sharp whisper, "Mason! Over here!" Mason hurried over, finding her crouched near a toppled shelf. She pointed to a narrow gap behind it. "There's a hidden storeroom. Looks untouched." Heart pounding with cautious hope, Mason helped Ava push the shelf aside, revealing a narrow door. He tested the handle, locked. With a grunt, Mason rammed his shoulder against it once, twice, until the old wood splintered and gave way. Inside, they found a small treasure trove: canned food, bottled water, bandages, even a few precious batteries. For a moment, the group allowed themselves to breathe easier. But the relief was short-lived. A sudden crash from the front of the store made everyone spin around. Tom, wide-eyed, stumbled backward, shouting, "They're here! They found us!" Through the broken windows, more walkers were pouring in, dozens of them, their hollow eyes fixed on the living. Mason's heart raced. "Everyone, back! Get to the storeroom! We hold them off there." The group scrambled, pulling supplies into the small room as Mason and Ava blocked the door with whatever they could find: shelves, crates, anything heavy. The walkers slammed against the barricade, their groans rising into a nightmarish chorus. Inside the storeroom, the group huddled together, breathless. Mason looked at each of them, his jaw set. "We're going to make it," he said firmly. "We have to." Outside, the pounding continued, the noise growing louder, more urgent. Mason tightened his grip on the metal pipe, knowing this was only the beginning of their fight. They were survivors in dead America, and they would not go down without a fight. "If you're ready, let me know, and I'll continue with part 2, 795 words. Want me to roll right into it?" The pounding on the storeroom door grew louder, the sound of hungry groans filling every corner of the small space. Mason pressed his back against the barricade, feeling each impact rattle through his body. Sweat dripped down his face, but he refused to let his grip falter. Inside, the others were scrambling. Ava quickly sorted the supplies they had pulled in, setting aside what they could carry when they escaped. Sarah checked Jacob's arm, where a splinter from the broken shelf had cut into his skin. Tom stood frozen near the corner, his face pale as he watched the barricade tremble. Mason took a deep breath. "We're not going to die in here," he said firmly, his voice cutting through the panic. "We've gotten out of worse." Ava gave him a sharp look. "Worse?" "Mason, we're trapped." He turned to her, his eyes steady. "We're not trapped." "Not yet." Ava glanced around the room, searching for another exit, another option. The storeroom was small, just metal shelves and dusty crates, but then her eyes landed on something near the back, an old ventilation shaft. "There," she whispered urgently, pointing. Mason followed her gaze and felt a flicker of hope. He motioned for Jacob. "You're the smallest. Can you fit through that?" Jacob nodded quickly, determination shining in his young eyes. Without hesitation, Mason helped him climb up, unscrewing the vent cover as fast as he could. "Go through, Jacob. Find a way outside, then come back around to help us. We'll hold them here." Jacob swallowed hard, crawling into the dark shaft. Before disappearing, he looked back. "I'll come back. I promise." Mason gave him a small, proud nod. "I know you will." The moment Jacob vanished, the barricade cracked, the wood splintering under the relentless assault of the undead outside. Mason and Ava braced themselves, pushing back with all their strength. Tom finally snapped out of his shock, running over to help. Sarah, her nurse instincts kicking in, prepared the makeshift weapons they had, sharpening a broken broomstick, tying a rag around the end of a metal rod. "If they get in, we fight. No one gives up." The barricade gave another sharp crack, and Mason's heart pounded in his chest. He could hear the walkers snarling, their bodies slamming again and again against the wood. Suddenly, a different sound cut through the chaos, the blaring horn of a car outside. For a moment, everyone froze. Mason's eyes widened. "Jacob!" The boy had found his way out faster than anyone expected. Outside, through the small dusty window, they could see an old pickup truck roaring down the street, its horn blaring, drawing the attention of the walkers away from the store. The pounding at the barricade slowed as the creatures turned, drawn by the noise. Mason let out a shaky breath. "That's our chance." Ava didn't wait, she rushed to the barricade, pulling aside the crates and wood. Mason and Tom helped, pushing the door open just enough to slip through. Outside, the air was thick with tension, but many of the walkers were now shuffling away, chasing after the noise. Jacob appeared near the truck, waving frantically. "Come on! Hurry!" The group sprinted out of the store, weapons ready, eyes darting around for any stragglers. Mason led the way, Ava right behind him, Sarah and Tom bringing up the rear. They reached the truck just as the walkers noticed them again, their groans rising in fury. Mason helped Sarah and Ava climb into the back while Tom and Jacob scrambled into the front. Mason grabbed onto the side, pulling himself up as the truck roared forward. The engine growled, tires screeching as they sped down the cracked road. Walkers reached for them, clawing at the sides, but the truck picked up speed, leaving the horde behind in a cloud of dust. Inside, Mason slumped down, breathless but alive. He clapped Jacob on the shoulder. "Good work, kid. You saved us." Jacob grinned, pride glowing on his face. "I told you I'd come back." Ava leaned against the side of the truck, her eyes scanning the road ahead. "Where do we go now?" she asked quietly. Mason looked ahead, his face hardening. "North. There's a camp, one we've heard about on the radios. They say it's safe, well guarded. If there's any chance for a real future, it's there." Sarah, wiping sweat from her forehead, gave a shaky laugh. "A safe camp. That sounds almost too good to be true." Mason met her eyes. "Maybe it is. But we can't stay here. We need to keep moving, keep surviving. And if that camp exists, we need to find it." As the truck rumbled down the empty highway, the group fell into a thoughtful silence. Behind them, the town of Stillwater faded into the distance, another ghost town in a dead America. Ahead, the unknown stretched out, filled with danger, uncertainty, and the faintest flicker of hope. They were survivors, after all. And they weren't done fighting yet. The old pickup truck rattled down the cracked highway, its engine groaning with every mile. Mason kept his eyes fixed on the road, hands tight on the steering wheel. Every mile they covered was one more step away from Stillwater, from the undead, from the nightmare they had barely escaped. In the back, Ava sat with Jacob, her arm around his shoulders. The boy leaned against her, exhausted but trying hard to stay awake. Sarah, sitting beside them, cleaned a gash on her arm, a souvenir from their desperate escape. Tom rode up front, silent, staring out the window at the endless stretch of broken land. The sun was beginning to dip, casting long shadows across the ruined landscape. Empty cars lined the sides of the highway, their windows smashed, doors hanging open like the mouths of dead animals. Occasionally, Mason would swerve to avoid a wreck or a fallen tree, but for the most part, the road was eerily empty. "How far to this camp?" Ava asked softly, breaking the silence. Mason glanced in the rearview mirror. "Another day, maybe two. If the truck holds up." Ava frowned. "And if it doesn't?" Mason gave a humorless chuckle. "Then we walk." Tom shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Are we sure this camp even exists? We're betting everything on some radio rumor." Mason's jaw tightened. "It's better than staying put and waiting to die." For a moment, no one spoke. Suddenly, the truck jolted. "What the?" Mason slammed on the brakes as the vehicle lurched to one side. Smoke hissed from under the hood. The group scrambled out, hearts pounding. Mason threw open the hood, coughing as a cloud of steam billowed out. "What is it?" Sarah asked anxiously. Mason examined the engine, his face grim. "We blew a hose. Maybe worse. We're not going anywhere until I fix it." Ava rubbed her forehead. "Do we have the tools?" Mason shook his head. "We might. But it's getting dark. We'll have to camp here for the night." Tom kicked at the dirt, frustrated. "Camping in the middle of the highway? That's insane. We're exposed." Mason turned to him sharply. "You want to wander into the trees at night? Be my guest." Reluctantly, the group set up a small camp beside the truck. They kept their weapons close, metal rods, sharpened sticks, whatever they had scavenged. Ava lit a small fire, its glow barely enough to chase away the deepening shadows. As the night deepened, the group huddled close, taking turns keeping watch. Mason sat at the edge of the camp, eyes scanning the darkness. Every rustle in the trees, every crack of a distant branch set his nerves on edge. Ava sat beside him, pulling her jacket tighter. "Do you ever think about before?" she asked softly. Mason let out a slow breath. "Every day. But thinking about the past doesn't help us now." Ava gave a sad smile. "Sometimes I wonder if we'll ever have a normal life again." Mason looked at her, his face softening. "If we survive this, maybe that's the future we're fighting for." Suddenly, a low groan echoed through the night. Mason shot to his feet, heart hammering. "Get ready," he hissed. The others scrambled up, gripping their weapons. Shapes emerged from the darkness, slow-moving, shuffling figures. The firelight caught rotting faces, dead eyes. "How many?" Tom whispered, his voice shaking. Mason counted quickly. 5, no, 7. Maybe more. They backed up toward the truck, forming a tight circle. Mason gripped his metal rod tightly. "Stay together. Don't let them surround us." The walkers closed in, groaning hungrily. One lunged, and Mason swung hard, knocking it to the ground. Ava stabbed another with her sharpened stick, gritting her teeth as it thrashed. Jacob stayed close to Sarah, eyes wide with terror, but the boy didn't run. Sarah swung her rod at an approaching walker, knocking it back. Tom fought clumsily, panic making his movements wild. Mason saw him stumble, a walker grabbing at his arm. Without thinking, Mason rushed over, slamming the creature away. "Hold it together, Tom," Mason barked. With a final push, the group managed to bring down the last walker. They stood panting, blood and sweat dripping from their faces. Ava looked around anxiously. "Are there more coming?" Mason listened carefully. The night was silent again, except for the crackle of their fire. "Not right now," he murmured. "But we need to be ready." They reinforced their barricade around the truck, stacking debris and pulling what they could find from nearby cars. It was a fragile defense, but it was all they had. As the group settled back down, Mason kept his eyes open, staring out into the dark. He knew they had survived another night, but every night brought new dangers, and every mile they traveled tested their strength. They were survivors, yes. But the real battle was only just beginning. The next morning, Mason was up before the sun, his face streaked with grime, hands deep in the truck's engine. He wiped sweat from his brow, eyes heavy with exhaustion. Ava approached quietly, wrapping a blanket tighter around Jacob's small frame. "Any luck?" she asked softly. Mason gave a small grunt. "I patched the hose, but it's temporary. If we push it too hard, it's going to blow again." Ava nodded grimly. "Then we just need to make it last long enough." By mid-morning, the group was back on the road, tension thick inside the cab. Tom kept nervously glancing at the side mirrors, while Sarah stared silently out the window, gripping her makeshift weapon. After hours of driving, the landscape began to change. The trees thinned, revealing the outskirts of a once bustling town, now eerily silent. Burned-out buildings leaned against each other like skeletons, shop fronts were smashed, and rusted cars lined the streets. Mason slowed the truck. "We'll need supplies. Food, water, anything we can grab." Tom frowned. "You sure we should stop here? Feels like a trap." Mason's jaw tightened. "We don't have a choice. We're almost out of everything." They pulled up near a small grocery store, its windows shattered. Mason killed the engine. The group climbed out cautiously, weapons in hand. Inside, the store was a disaster, shelves overturned, scattered cans and boxes littering the floor. The air was heavy with dust and the faint scent of decay. "Stay sharp," Mason warned. "We don't know what's hiding in here." Ava led Jacob carefully through the aisles, filling a bag with whatever they could salvage: canned beans, bottled water, boxes of crackers. Sarah kept watch near the entrance, eyes darting nervously. Suddenly, there was a noise, a faint shuffling near the back of the store. Mason froze, signaling the group to stop. Out of the shadows stumbled a figure, but it wasn't a walker. It was a man, thin and ragged, his eyes wide with fear. He raised trembling hands. "Please, don't shoot." Mason lowered his weapon slightly, still wary. "Who are you?" The man swallowed hard. "Name's Carter. I've been hiding here for days." Are you with the camp?" Tom snorted. "We're just trying to survive, same as you." Carter's eyes darted around. "Please, let me come with you. I know a safer place, an old factory on the edge of town. We can hide there, wait out the night." Ava exchanged a glance with Mason. We can't just leave him, she whispered. Mason hesitated. All right, but you stay where we can see you. No surprises. Grateful, Carter quickly gathered his few belongings, a battered backpack, a rusted knife, and followed them out. As they walked back toward the truck, Mason's instincts prickled. Something wasn't right. The streets were too quiet. Suddenly, a sharp whistle cut through the air. Mason's heart dropped. From the alleyways, figures emerged, but these weren't walkers. They were people, rough-looking, armed with makeshift weapons. Raiders. Carter stumbled back, panic flashing in his eyes. I didn't know, he gasped. The leader of the raiders, a tall man with a scar across his cheek, grinned coldly. Well. Fresh supplies, and fresh meat. Mason shoved Ava and Jacob behind him. Run for the truck, he shouted. The group sprinted as the raiders surged forward. Mason swung his rod at one attacker, knocking him back. Tom grappled with another, punching wildly. Ava shoved Jacob into the truck, yanking the door open. Sarah swung her weapon fiercely, shouting at Carter, "Help us!" But Carter was already running, away from them. Mason saw it too late. He set us up. Fueled by adrenaline, Mason fought his way to the driver's seat, slamming the keys into the ignition. The engine coughed, sputtered, then roared to life. Get in! Mason yelled. One by one, they dove into the truck. Mason hit the gas, tires screeching as the truck lurched forward. The raiders gave chase, throwing rocks, shouting curses, but the truck sped away, rattling over the broken pavement. Breathing hard, the group sat in stunned silence. We trusted him, Ava murmured, shaking her head. Mason's hands gripped the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. We can't trust anyone out here, he said grimly. From now on, we watch each other's backs. No one else. Jacob, his face pale, leaned against Ava, eyes wide and scared. Mason glanced at the rearview mirror, watching the ruined town fade behind them. They had survived the night before, and they had survived this betrayal, but the road ahead was growing darker, and the dangers were only multiplying. They weren't just fighting the undead anymore. They were fighting the living, too. The truck rattled down the cracked highway, the sun slipping lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the desolate landscape. Mason's hands gripped the wheel tightly, his jaw set. No one had spoken for nearly an hour. Ava sat curled in the back seat with Jacob, quietly murmuring reassurances to the boy. Sarah stared out the window, her knuckles white where she clutched her weapon. Tom, sitting shotgun, broke the silence first. We're almost out of gas. Mason let out a breath, nodding. I know. We'll pull over soon and look for a siphon point. The highway was littered with rusted, abandoned cars, a silent graveyard of those who had once tried to flee. As they rolled past, Mason's sharp eyes scanned for anything useful, intact gas tanks, supplies, signs of life, or worse, signs of the undead. They came to a slow stop near a cluster of vehicles, half buried in dust and weeds. Mason killed the engine. All right, let's move fast, he instructed, climbing out with Tom. Ava, keep Jacob in the truck. Sarah, cover us. Tom pried open the gas caps, checking levels while Mason rigged up a siphon hose. Time felt like it was slipping through their fingers, every second out here was dangerous. Suddenly, Sarah hissed, Wait, do you hear that? They all froze. At first, there was nothing, just the faint rustle of wind. Then, a distant moaning. Mason's heart dropped. Across the hill, shapes emerged, dozens of them. Walkers. Get back in the truck. Mason barked. Tom scrambled to pull the siphon hose free, but the fuel was coming too slowly. Mason clenched his fists, eyes darting between the advancing horde and the trickling gas line. We don't have time, Tom gasped. We need that fuel. Mason snapped. The walkers drew closer, their rotting faces twisted in grotesque hunger. Sarah fired a warning shot into the air, trying to distract them, but it barely slowed their shuffling advance. Suddenly, Ava shouted from the truck, "Behind you!" More walkers were approaching from the opposite direction. They were surrounded. Mason made a snap decision. "Leave the hose, get in the truck, now!" Tom didn't argue. Together, they sprinted back, slamming the doors shut just as the first walkers reached the vehicle. Mason twisted the key in the ignition. The truck coughed, sputtered, then roared to life. He slammed the gas pedal down. The truck lurched forward, ramming through the walkers in its path, tires screeching as they powered back onto the highway. Inside, everyone was breathing hard, adrenaline pumping. "That was too close," Sarah muttered. Mason nodded grimly, watching the fuel gauge dip lower. "We won't make it much farther without gas." Tom glanced at the map they had spread across the dashboard. "There's a rest stop a few miles ahead. Maybe we can find something there." Mason's eyes flicked to the mirror, watching the shrinking line of walkers they'd just escaped. "Let's hope." As dusk fell, they reached the rest stop, a small cluster of buildings, half-collapsed and overgrown with vines. Mason parked the truck behind a concrete barrier, shutting off the engine to save what little fuel remained. "We go in together," he instructed. "No splitting up." The inside of the gas station was dark, lit only by the dying light filtering through broken windows. Shelves were toppled, papers scattered across the floor. Ava and Sarah checked the shelves for supplies while Mason and Tom headed out back, looking for a fuel storage area. Behind the building, Mason found an old fuel drum, half buried under debris. He tapped it, it echoed, but there was still some weight to it. "Think we can use it?" Tom asked. Mason nodded, already working to rig up the siphon. Suddenly, Tom stiffened. "Did you hear that?" Mason froze. From the far end of the lot came the faint sound of footsteps, but not the dragging shuffle of walkers. These were light, quick, human. Mason's stomach clenched. "We're not alone," he whispered. He motioned to Tom, and they ducked behind the fuel drum, peering cautiously around the edge. A group of figures appeared, silhouetted against the twilight. They were armed, moving with practiced coordination. Raiders, another group, or maybe the same ones they'd escaped before. Mason's heart pounded. "We need to warn the others." Tom reached for his radio, whispering into it. "Ava, Sarah, company coming." Quietly, back to the truck. Inside, Ava's voice came through softly. "Understood." Mason weighed their options. Fight or flee? The fuel wasn't fully siphoned yet, but time was running out. Suddenly, one of the raiders barked an order, and Mason knew they'd been spotted. "Run," he hissed. They sprinted back toward the truck just as the raiders opened fire. Bullets whizzed past, kicking up dirt and sparks. Sarah and Ava were already throwing open the truck doors, shoving Jacob inside. Mason leaped into the driver's seat, gunning the engine as Tom slammed the door shut. The truck roared forward, smashing through the barrier as the raiders gave chase. Mason didn't look back, his focus was fixed on the dark road ahead. They had survived another close call, but Mason knew it was only a matter of time before their luck ran out. This world was no longer just about escaping the dead. It was about staying ahead of the living. The headlights cut through the darkness as Mason sped down the empty road, heart hammering. Behind them, the glow of headlights in the distance, the raiders were still on their tail. "They're gaining!" Tom shouted, gripping the dashboard. Mason clenched his jaw, weaving between wrecked cars and potholes. "We need to lose them." Ava crouched in the back, arms wrapped protectively around Jacob. "Where can we go? We can't just outrun them forever." Sarah peered at the map spread across her lap, tracing her finger along the faded lines. "There's an old tunnel ahead, off the main road. If we can make it there, we might shake them." Mason nodded, sharply turning off the highway onto a smaller road, gravel spraying under the tires. The truck bounced over rough terrain as the tunnel loomed ahead, a dark, gaping mouth carved into the hillside. "Hang on!" Mason yelled, slamming the gas pedal. The truck shot forward, plunging into the tunnel's darkness. Inside, It was damp and narrow, the walls echoing with the roar of the engine. Mason flicked off the headlights, hoping the raiders would lose sight of them. For a moment, there was only the sound of tires on wet pavement and everyone's ragged breathing. Then, a flicker of light behind them. "They're coming in," Sarah hissed. Mason scanned the tunnel walls, eyes narrowing. Up ahead, the tunnel curved sharply, and he spotted a maintenance alcove just wide enough to hide the truck. Without hesitating, he jerked the wheel, pulling them into the shadows. He cut the engine. Silence fell. They waited, tense and breathless, as the sound of engines grew louder, the raiders' vehicles speeding past the tunnel's entrance, their headlights sweeping briefly across the walls before disappearing down the road. For several long seconds, no one spoke. Then, Mason exhaled slowly. "They're gone, for now." Ava let out a shaky laugh, hugging Jacob tighter. "That was too close." Tom clapped Mason on the shoulder. "Nice driving, man." But Mason's expression stayed grim. "We can't stay here. They'll circle back eventually." Sarah nodded, folding up the map. "There's a small town a few miles ahead. If we're lucky, we can find shelter before sunrise." Mason restarted the engine, pulling carefully back onto the road. The tunnel emptied out onto a narrow stretch of highway that led toward the distant silhouette of a town, dark buildings rising like jagged teeth against the horizon. As they approached, Mason slowed, scanning for signs of danger. The town was eerily quiet, its streets choked with abandoned cars and crumbling storefronts. "Looks like everyone's either dead or long gone," Tom murmured. They pulled up near a boarded-up diner, parking the truck out of sight behind a delivery truck. Mason turned to the group. "All right, we split up, 2 groups. Sarah, you're with me. Ava, you and Tom stay here with Jacob. Keep the truck ready in case we need to move fast." Ava nodded, though her face was pale. "Be careful." Mason and Sarah moved cautiously through the deserted streets, weapons drawn. They checked the diner first, empty, save for overturned chairs and moldy plates of food left behind. The air smelled stale, thick with dust. They found a small storeroom in the back. Mason rifled through the shelves, pocketing a few cans of food while Sarah kept watch at the door. Suddenly, she stiffened. "Mason, do you hear that?" He froze. There it was, faint at first, but unmistakable. A dragging, shuffling sound outside. Walkers. Mason crept to the window, peering through a crack in the boards. His heart sank. They were everywhere. Dozens of them, emerging from alleyways and broken buildings, drawn by the noise of the truck and their earlier escape. "We need to move, now," Mason whispered. They slipped out the back, weaving between buildings to avoid the growing crowd. Mason tapped his radio. "Ava, we've got walkers converging on the truck. Get ready to move." Ava's voice crackled back, tense. "We see them. Hurry." Mason and Sarah sprinted through the narrow alleys, dodging outstretched arms and snapping jaws. They reached the truck just as Ava threw open the door. "Come on," she shouted, helping Mason haul Jacob inside. Sarah leaped into the back, slamming the door shut. Mason floored the gas, the truck lurching forward as walkers slammed against the sides. Tires squealed on the pavement as they tore down the main street, narrowly missing the grasping hordes. For a few terrifying moments, it felt like they wouldn't make it. Walkers swarmed from every direction, their rotting faces pressed against the windows. But then, they were free, bursting out of the town limits, leaving the undead behind. Inside the truck, the group sat in breathless silence. Tom finally let out a low whistle. "I can't believe we made it." Mason's hands trembled slightly on the wheel. "We won't get this lucky again." Ava brushed Jacob's hair back, her eyes wide with fear. "Where do we go now?" Sarah unfolded the map once more, her finger hovering over a distant mark. "There's a rumored safe zone, a military camp. If it's still standing, it might be our only shot." Mason nodded grimly. "Then that's where we head." Outside, the first rays of dawn began to touch the sky. The night had been long, but their fight was far from over. By late afternoon, the group finally saw it. Beyond the cracked highway and ruined overpasses, beyond the burned-out houses and skeletal trees, rose a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. Behind it, sandbag walls, guard towers, and the faint glimmer of movement, people. Mason slowed the truck, eyes narrowed. That's it. That's the camp. Ava leaned forward. It looks intact. Sarah squinted through the windshield. I count at least 3 guards on the towers. And look, they're armed. Tom gave a low laugh. Finally, some good news. But Mason didn't look relieved. His grip tightened on the wheel. We need to approach carefully. No sudden moves. They drove slowly toward the checkpoint. As they neared, a voice rang out over a megaphone. Stop the vehicle. Hands where we can see them. Mason raised both hands, glancing back. Everyone, stay calm. Armed soldiers approached, rifles raised, eyes sharp beneath their helmets. One of them, a woman with a captain's insignia, stepped forward. Who are you? Where are you coming from? Mason cleared his throat. We're survivors. We came from the south. We're looking for refuge. The captain studied them for a long moment. Then she signaled the guards to lower their weapons. You're lucky. We don't take in many anymore. Follow me. Inside the camp, they saw tents, supply trucks, and dozens of survivors, families huddled together, soldiers patrolling, medics tending the wounded. There was a quiet tension in the air, a sense that one wrong move could shatter the fragile peace. The captain led them to a briefing tent. I'm Captain Reyes, she introduced herself. You found the last operational military camp in this region. But I'll be straight with you, we're barely holding on. Supplies are low, manpower is stretched thin, and we've got constant breaches from both walkers and raiders. Mason nodded grimly. We can help. We're fighters. Reyes studied him. We'll see. They were given a small corner of the camp to rest. Ava settled Jacob onto a cot, brushing his hair gently. He needs real food. Real rest. Sarah sat beside her. At least we're safe, for now. Tom looked around uneasily. I don't know, something feels off. Look at the soldiers. They're on edge. Mason agreed. As night fell, he wandered the camp, noting the nervous glances, the hurried repairs to barricades, the way the guards twitched at every distant sound. He found Captain Reyes by the command post. What's going on? He asked quietly. Reyes sighed. We intercepted radio chatter earlier today. A massive horde is moving in this direction. Thousands of them. We can't hold this place when they hit. Mason's stomach turned. How long do we have? A day, maybe 2. Mason looked over the camp, the families, the tired soldiers, the fragile walls. Then we need a plan. Reyes nodded. That's why I wanted to speak with you. My scouts tell me you've survived out there a long time. I could use someone like you to help organize defenses. Mason took a deep breath. All right. Tell me what you need. By morning, the entire camp was buzzing with preparation. Mason, Tom, and Sarah helped reinforce the outer walls, piling sandbags, setting traps, and rigging makeshift alarms. Ava worked with the medics, ensuring the sick and injured were moved to safer areas. Captain Reyes stood on a platform, briefing the soldiers. This is it, people. We either hold this camp, or we fall. Mason moved among the fighters, offering words of encouragement, checking weapons, and positioning snipers. Tom shook his head as they worked. Feels like we're preparing for the end. Mason clapped his shoulder. We've made it through worse. But as night approached, they could hear it. The distant, bone-chilling sound of thousands of dragging feet. The moans. The scraping. The dead were coming. As the sun set, the first wave hit. Walkers slammed into the fences, clawing and gnashing. Soldiers fired from the towers, picking them off one by one. Mason and Tom worked the barricades, driving back any that broke through. Ava and Sarah rushed supplies to the front lines, dodging the chaos. For hours, they fought, the night lit by gunfire and the glow of burning barricades. But it wasn't enough. By midnight, the fences began to buckle. Fall back! Fall back to the inner perimeter! Captain Reyes shouted. Mason grabbed Ava's arm. Get Jacob! We need to move! They sprinted through the camp as the outer walls collapsed, the horde pouring in like a tidal wave. Explosions rocked the ground as the soldiers triggered preset charges, buying precious seconds. But Mason knew they were running out of time. As they regrouped at the inner defenses, he turned to Reyes. What's the evacuation plan? Reyes shook her head grimly. We don't have one. We stand, or we die. Mason clenched his fists, glancing at Ava, Jacob, Tom, and Sarah. Not if I can help it. The inner perimeter was little more than a circle of barricades and overturned vehicles. Beyond it, the camp was chaos, the outer defenses had fallen, and the horde was surging in. Mason crouched beside Captain Reyes, scanning the map spread on the crate between them. We can't hold this line forever, Mason said grimly. We need to fall back, regroup, or... Reyes shook her head sharply. There's nowhere else to fall back to. This is the last stand. Tom ran up, out of breath, wiping sweat and grime from his face. The west side is crumbling. We lost 2 soldiers already. They're swarming faster than we can shoot. Ava arrived next, carrying Jacob in her arms, his eyes wide and terrified. We can't stay here, Mason. There's too many. Mason stared at the map, his jaw clenched. His mind raced. Suddenly, Sarah spoke up. What about the fuel depot? They all turned to her. The fuel tanks near the storage units, Sarah continued. If we can ignite them, we can take out a huge part of the horde. At least clear a path. Reyes' eyes narrowed. You're suggesting we blow up half the camp? Better than all of us dying here. For a long second, no one spoke. Then Mason slammed his fist on the crate. She's right. It's our only chance. They moved quickly. Captain Reyes ordered her soldiers to cover the south and east sides while Mason, Tom, Sarah, and Ava headed west, slipping past the barricades under cover of darkness. The fuel depot loomed ahead, giant tanks stacked behind a metal fence. And beyond it, a sea of undead, pressing forward, their groans filling the night. Mason crouched low. We need to set charges here, and here, he pointed, marking the base of the tanks. That should create enough of a blast to break the line. Tom frowned. And then what? Run for it? Mason smirked grimly. We'll figure it out. They worked fast, rigging makeshift explosives from what little they had, grenades, fuel canisters, and wired charges. Ava kept watch, clutching Jacob close, while Sarah coordinated the timers. But just as Mason set the final charge, a walker lunged from the shadows. Mason! Ava screamed. He spun, jamming his knife into the creature's head, but the noise drew more. Suddenly, they were surrounded. We're out of time. Mason shouted. Light it up. Sarah hesitated. But we're still. Do it. The blast tore through the night like a thunderclap. Flames roared into the sky as the fuel tanks erupted, a firestorm engulfing the horde. Mason grabbed Ava and Jacob, hauling them back as debris rained down. Tom yanked Sarah out of the way just as a wave of heat washed over them. For a moment, it worked, the horde reeled, many crushed or burned in the explosion, leaving a gap in the western side. Move! Move! Mason roared. They sprinted through the firelit wreckage, dodging fallen bodies and flaming debris. Soldiers at the inner perimeter shouted and waved them on, covering their escape with bursts of gunfire. By dawn, the survivors gathered near the collapsed walls, breathless and battered. The horde was still out there, but they had bought themselves time. Captain Reyes wiped soot from her face, nodding grimly. That was insane. But you saved us. Mason shook his head. We only delayed the inevitable. Ava knelt beside Jacob, who clung tightly to her. We can't stay here, Mason. Even if we held them off today, they'll come again tomorrow. Sarah crossed her arms. We need to move. Find somewhere they can't follow. Reyes sighed. There's nowhere left. All the major routes are overrun. Mason stared at the horizon, eyes hard. Then we make one. They spent the next hours gathering what little remained: vehicles, fuel, weapons, supplies. Mason helped the soldiers plan an evacuation route, knowing the camp couldn't hold another attack. But tension simmered in the air. Not everyone will make it, Reyes admitted quietly. We don't have enough trucks. Mason looked at his group: Ava, Jacob, Tom, Sarah, and the soldiers around them. He felt the weight of every life pressing down on his shoulders. We'll figure something out, he promised. We have to. As night fell again, Mason sat with Ava beneath the stars, Jacob asleep between them. Do you ever wonder if there's anywhere left out there? Ava whispered. Mason gazed at the darkened sky. I have to believe there is. And if there's not? He pulled her close, his voice quiet but fierce. Then we'll build it ourselves. In the distance, the groans rose again, faint, but unmistakable. The dead were coming. And this time, Mason knew, there would be no holding them back. They would have to run, to fight, to survive, or be swallowed whole by the darkness. He stood, steeling himself. Get some rest, Ava, he murmured. Tomorrow, we fight for the future. The dawn broke gray and heavy over the battered remnants of the camp. Exhaustion clung to every survivor like a second skin. Faces were drawn, bodies bruised, and hope, flickering but still burning, held fast. Mason knew the next hours would decide everything. Captain Reyes gathered the remaining fighters. We've lost too much ground. The horde will be here in hours, maybe less. This is the last chance to hold a line and protect what's left of our people. Mason's eyes swept the crowd. Soldiers, families, weary survivors, all waiting for orders. Among them, Ava held Jacob close, his small hands trembling but his spirit unbroken. Mason's heart ached. We're not just fighting for survival anymore, Mason said, voice steady but fierce. We're fighting for the future of humanity. If we fall here, this nightmare will never end. Tom stepped forward, gripping his rifle tightly. We'll hold the western ridge. It's narrow and easier to defend. Sarah nodded. I'll coordinate the medics and set up a safe zone near the east barricade. Reyes gave a curt nod. Good. I'll take command of the main defense line. As preparations rushed forward, Mason found himself surveying the terrain, looking for any advantage. The horde was vast, thousands of undead moaning and shuffling closer by the minute, filling the horizon like a dark wave about to crash. Suddenly, a scout burst into the tent. Captain! They're almost here. Too many to count. Reyes's eyes hardened. Then we give them hell. Outside, the air grew thick with tension. Mason checked his weapons, his fingers steady despite the adrenaline pounding through him. Ava approached quietly. Be careful, she said softly. We need you. He nodded. I'll come back. We all will. Jacob clung to her, eyes wide, sensing the fear in the camp. But Ava forced a brave smile. The first wave crashed against the barricades like a storm. Walkers swarmed over sandbags, their dead hands clawing at anything alive. Soldiers fired from behind cover, but bullets were limited, and the sheer numbers threatened to overwhelm. Mason fought on the western ridge with Tom, each shot precise, each movement calculated. They pushed back the attackers, but the ground trembled beneath the onslaught. A deafening roar erupted as the horde pushed forward with renewed ferocity. Mason spotted figures moving faster, smarter, some kind of infected, more dangerous than the rest. They're evolving, Sarah's voice crackled over the radio. Watch your flanks. Mason's heart sank. The fight was far from over. Inside the camp, chaos reigned. Ava and Sarah worked tirelessly, tending wounds and calming frightened children. The safe zone was under threat, walkers had breached the perimeter. Ava gritted her teeth. We have to hold them here. No matter what. Outside, Mason's unit faced the harsh truth: ammunition was running low, and reinforcements were nowhere in sight. He turned to Tom. We need a plan to break through the horde and escape. Tom's face was grim. The trucks are loaded, but we have to get there. It's a killing field. Mason's mind raced. There was one chance, a narrow ravine beyond the ridge that could provide cover. If they could reach it, maybe they could fight their way out. Let's move, Mason ordered. As they made their way down the ridge, the horde pressed closer, relentless and merciless. Walkers grabbed at their legs, and Mason barely managed to pull Tom free from a grasping hand. Suddenly, a scream tore through the air: a soldier had fallen. Mason's breath caught, but there was no time to stop. They had to move. Reaching the ravine, the survivors took cover behind rocks and fallen trees. Mason looked back at the camp, now engulfed in flames and shadows. We can't save everyone, he said, voice heavy. But we'll save who we can. Tom nodded. We're not done yet. Ava held Jacob close as the last survivors gathered near the ravine. She met Mason's eyes, determination shining through exhaustion. We survive, Mason whispered. Together. The groans of the horde grew louder, the final battle looming. The fight for humanity's future was not over. Let me know when you're ready for Part 10, the final chapter. It'll bring closure, hope, and a powerful ending to their courageous journey. Part 10, A New Dawn. The sky was still dark when Mason took a deep breath and scanned the ravine. Around him, the last survivors of the camp gathered, their faces etched with exhaustion and fear, but also with fierce determination. This was the moment they had fought for, the final stand before the uncertain road ahead. Captain Reyes checked her weapons one last time, then turned to Mason. We hold this position no matter what. If the horde breaks through, everything we fought for is lost. Mason nodded. Then let's make sure that doesn't happen. The groans of the approaching horde echoed from the valley below, growing louder, closer. But Mason saw something new, an ember of hope among the darkness. The survivors were ready. Every eye held fire. Tom adjusted his grip on his rifle. This is it. Suddenly, the first wave surged upward, the shambling mass of walkers clawing at rocks and trees, desperate to close in. Mason fired steadily, each shot aimed to buy precious seconds. Soldiers behind him fought fiercely, their shouts and gunfire piercing the night. Ava stood close, shielding Jacob with her body, her eyes locked on the battle. Hours passed like moments, the fight unrelenting. Walkers fell by the dozens, but more pressed forward with endless hunger. Then, amidst the chaos, a new sound: engine roars from the distant road. Reinforcements? Mason squinted toward the horizon and saw headlights flickering in the distance. Relief surged through him. They were not alone. The newcomers were not soldiers, they were a ragtag group of survivors led by a woman with a commanding presence. They quickly linked with Mason's group, bringing fresh weapons, food, and hope. Reyes welcomed them. Thank God you came. The woman nodded. We're here to help rebuild. To fight for what's left of humanity. With renewed strength, the survivors pushed back the horde. The tide began to turn. The undead faltered, confused by the unexpected resistance. Mason allowed himself a moment to breathe. This wasn't just survival anymore, it was a beginning. When dawn finally broke, the ravine was quiet except for the heavy breaths of the living. Mason stood on a rock, looking out over the land, scarred, broken, but still alive. He turned to Ava, who smiled tiredly but warmly. We did it, she said. Yeah, Mason replied. But it's just the start. Together, they looked toward the horizon where a new future waited, one they would build with courage, hope, and the unbreakable will to survive. the story of Dead America was far from over. The end. If you want, I can help you create a powerful intro and outro for your audiobook or help with any other parts of the project.